It's 3 minutes past 11 here, so let's begin. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to today's webinar. So practical tips and tricks for securing your CI/CD pipelines. My name is Zan Markin. I'm a developer advocate at CircleCI. I live in London, UK. So I'm kind of covering the EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, Africa regions. That's why we're doing this at morning-ish or noon-ish in those time zones. So yeah, if you want to get in touch, you can reach out to me by email. I currently don't tweet as much tech-related things. Anyway, today we'll talk about security and in particular how you can apply kind of secure practices to your CI/CD pipelines, whatever you are building. I'm joined with my colleague Jess, who has shared a message in the chat, basically. If you have any questions, please use Q&A feature here in Zoom so that you can ask, and we'll see them and answer things when appropriate. If it's super relevant to what I'm currently talking about, I might answer it right there and then. If not, I'll try to answer everything at the end of the webinar. We have plenty of time for questions at the end. Yeah, obviously, if you have any questions, if you have any issues like you can't hear me, you can't see the screen, please do let us know, and we can address that right away as well. Yeah, so first we'll look at what we're actually talking about. So why security is such an important topic, why it matters, and especially in the CI/CD context, where does it actually come into play? And then we have kind of three thematic topics for like practical tips and tricks for applying secure practices. The first one is protecting your secrets and using like encrypted environment variables, etc. Then we'll move on to adding vulnerability scans as part of your pipelines themselves. So yeah, stuff you can actually automate so that it doesn't have to be done manually, which is always good, and how you can leverage that. And we'll round it up with a section on governance, which is probably quite a lot of stuff to talk about. But yeah, things like what you can do infrastructure-wise, different approval strategies like audit capabilities, etc., and obviously end up with a series of questions. I have some slides, and I also have some things to demo, and we'll also be looking at some CircleCI's website and documentation pages. At the end of the webinar, obviously we're recording this, so you will get this recording in an email alongside with all the slides, and I'll link to all of the resources. So all of the code samples, all of the resources links that we'll be talking about, I'll add them to the slide at the end. Anyway, let's begin. So I had a quick look at who the registrants were, and it's pretty much all mostly people familiar with CircleCI and CI/CD. It's very much centered around CircleCI and definitely around CI/CD. So some familiarity is definitely beneficial. And what you do for your day job, you could be a software engineer. There's plenty of those. Working in DevOps, cloud infrastructure, security, obviously, and also QA. So anyone dealing in those kind of automation pipelines, but also people who don't necessarily touch those pipelines directly, like engineering managers, heads of engineering, CTOs, product managers, operators, etc. So anyone can get something out of it. But yes, people working directly with pipelines are going to definitely benefit the most. So security, why do we actually care about this thing? Because the world is scary and dangerous, and every week or month we hear a new horror story about some website, some system, some company being compromised and either leaking customer data or their systems being compromised in whatever way. So yeah, this is just keeps happening. More and more is happening. So yeah, we need to be extra vigilant and use all the best tools at our disposal to actually mitigate the risk of this happening to us as well. Especially because like every organization nowadays, whether you're working in tech, like Circle CI is pretty much just a tech company, or you could be working on in like a government body or like a regulated industry, you are already also a software organization. So you're shipping some software. So yes, software delivery process really does impact your entire business, your entire situation. Anyway, that's kind of what in a general, but let's look at CI/CD from the kind of toolchain perspective, like what actually happens in this process. So you're probably working on some source code. So like I'll use examples from GitHub, but you might be using other source control tools like Bitbucket, for example. And that's where your team spends most of the time, right? You commit code, you push changes, and then at the end of the day or end of the week, end of the release cycle, you want to see those changes running in production. And that's where we come in. So we help you automate everything that's kind of happening in between. So building your applications, building your software, testing it, definitely testing it, doing a lot of tests, verification, security scans, etc., and any other things that you might be doing, all the way to deploying, whether you're deploying manually or just having binaries and then deploying, whether you're deploying automatically everything or have kind of releasing binaries that you can then manually deploy. It doesn't really matter. Or it doesn't also matter if you kind of have a manual QA process. Plenty of organizations have that, and that's completely fine. Or a review. This is all kind of can be orchestrated through this all the way to, yes, running your applications so that end users can actually use them. That's what we're talking about. So yeah, we are Circle CI. We've been around for a little over 10 years, and we've grown quite rapidly since then. So we are basically spread out across the entire world. Since yesterday, also in France, because we announced an acquisition of a company called Ponycode from Paris, which is pretty cool. And wherever developers are, we help them build better software faster, more effectively, and hopefully in a more secure manner. And yeah, our customers and our scale definitely speaks to that. So imagine like 2.5 million jobs built every single day on our platform. That's probably higher now, to be honest, because these slides are, this slide is probably a couple of months old. Anyway, speaking of security, on a very, very, very brief overview of what actually happens on the platform itself without you actually having to do anything. Obviously, we are tied to your VCS provider. So all of your permissions that you have in your VCS, so in your organization, are basically mirrored with Circle CI. So whatever access permissions you have, there's going to be the same, using the same OAuth that you use for your VCS to access Circle CI. We encrypt pretty much everything, like environment variables. We'll touch on those a bit later. all the way to storing actual artifacts and ultimately running your jobs in a clean runtime environment, like a sandbox, a Docker container, or virtual machine, which is spun up and then destroyed after it's finished. And this mainly focuses on the cloud edition of Circle CI. We also have the server edition, so Circle CI for server, which basically runs on your infrastructure. A lot of organizations have to run CI/CD on their own infrastructure, and that's obviously where you control everything. But obviously, we make it as easy as possible and the experience as seamless as possible for your users. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. We have a bunch of privacy and security certifications. A lot of them are US specific. So FedRAMP is obviously a US government one. One that's probably more relevant for the non-US audience is the Cloud Security Alliance. It's kind of STAR checklist, basically. We have this kind of security questionnaire from them available on their website that you can see like a bunch of our answers. So yeah, if you need something like that. So yeah, that's kind of what we have built into the platform. And speaking of the platform, we'll be looking at two different things here today. One is going to be, we'll be looking at the configuration side of things. So Circle CI is configured using code, YAML in particular, which is committed inside your repo. So it's part of your repository and describes what actually needs to happen. So what needs to run, how it needs to run, where it needs to go deploy, what kind of tests, etc., etc., etc. And the other part is the dashboard, obviously. So where you kind of configure any security, secure context, environment variables. You can check what's happened at a glance. You can approve jobs, etc. And there is the thing that you don't see as well. So the API, which again is the other interface that people do interact with Circle CI, and that's kind of like can do pretty much anything that the dashboard can, more or less. Anyway, so that's kind of brief introduction to Circle CI. We'll be looking at the configuration file today. So at the top level, it describes something called a pipeline. So a CI/CD pipeline, which then gets triggered each time we commit. It can also be triggered by a schedule, for example, or by an API. And in this pipeline, we describe workflows. So essentially a graph of jobs that tell it in which order they need to be executed, under which conditions, maybe on some branches, maybe on some tags only. And a job is essentially a set of commands that executes in a given environment. And this can be a Docker container, a virtual machine, or a runner, essentially, in the case of cloud, which executes on your local infrastructure, even though the thing is running all in the cloud. I'll touch on those a bit later as well. Anyway, let's talk about secrets. Secrets are, what are your secrets? So I'm talking about things like API keys, talking about things like deployment keys, like your AWS deployment credentials, for example. If you have your applications and services built on AWS, things like that. Webhook URLs as well. You don't think about them as secrets, but they often have this kind of key encoded in the URL itself, and you want to keep it like as safe as possible. There is a ton of things that can also constitute the secrets. Like some services have a username and password logins, and they can be stored as secrets as well. And the best, probably the easiest thing you can do to kind of follow the least amount of best practices is to store those secrets in environment variables and inject them to your jobs as they're running as part of the pipeline, as opposed to having them stored in a GitHub repository. In fact, like there is tools that will already scan your GitHub repositories for any kind of secrets that are in there. So if you've ever committed last week I was doing a workshop and I committed a Discord webhook URL, which is supposed to be private, in this kind of workshop repo that we had. And because it was an open source project, this tool called Git Guardian would scan it and automatically notify, hey, you've committed something you shouldn't, you should rotate this. And this is essentially the simplest best practice. So how do we go about this? So this is my dashboard. So my Circle CI dashboard, I have one project here called Pipeline Security, which we'll be looking at. The easiest way to store encrypted variables is by going into project settings and going in this kind of environment variables. And then we can store them, give them a name. So for example, Docker Hub username, Docker Hub password, and etc. But you can see that I'm not really using environment variables here because these are project specific. So they'll only persist to this particular project. Instead, what I'm doing is I am using this thing called contexts, which essentially are containers for environment variables, but you can actually mix and match how you're going to access them. For example, to basically a job level, you can tell a job specifically what kind of environment variables it needs. So I have one for my sneak job here, which has a sneak token, and it's only available to that particular job. And I have one for my production deployment. I have one for my dev deployment and all sorts of things. And these are organization specific. So you can have, for example, multiple applications that essentially use the same cloud provider environment. For example, your production AWS account, and you can have a single context for a number of these jobs, because obviously you want to have a single deployment key that you can then rotate very easily. Speaking of rotation, with context, you can also use the API to Circle CI API to essentially, I think it's a put request you need to make to just provide the new key, so you can actually rotate those keys without changing anything in your pipeline. And how does this look in an actual pipeline? I hope this is visible. Jess, do let me know if it isn't. This is my project in the repo. This is, I'm just using GitHub's built-in editor. I have a number of jobs defined here. And basically, in my workflow, you can see that I'm basically passing this context to a number of jobs. For example, my dependency vulnerability scan, my deploy app has this context specified, and they have different contexts basically, which is pretty cool. And so yeah, each one of them can have a different context. You can have multiple contexts, so you can essentially combine environment variables from different sides, which is super powerful, especially because like some services that you might be using could be compromised. I hope they're not, but they could be compromised. It's not unheard of that services have been like one of their CLIs, for example, has been compromised. And if you have everything in your kind of project level environment variables, everything from your service API keys that you use for running some tests, all the way to your production environment API keys, they're all available to every single job. And with context, you actually control what's available. So, and you can see, for example, if we look into one individual job, for example, my build Docker job has a step called preparing environment variables that happens in the beginning. And you can see that obviously these ones are built in. And then these ones come from project settings and or context. So they kind of get merged. So Docker login, Docker password, and Heroku API key, which are part of my deploy dev, I think, environment. So, so yeah, you can really fine tune what gets injected to where, and have this available from this config file. I hope this is all clear. If you want to learn more about things like key rotation, there is a page on the docs. So let me go to the docs and do. I think it's using context. I think here it is. So yeah, I definitely saw it in the docs. Oh yeah, here. You can use the CLI, you can use the API, etc. So it's super, super powerful if you use context for this. So yeah, that's kind of the very brief introduction to secrets and how to protect them. Hopefully no one is actually has any secrets in your repositories, but yeah, TLDR, use context as much as possible. They're very powerful. We'll use them later as well in the presentation for something else. For now, let's look at how do we integrate scanning for vulnerabilities in our repository. So there is, you know how you have things like tests, right? We're running, a lot of times we're running some tests on our CI as part of our CI/CD pipeline, especially the CI part. But you don't just need to run tests. You can also run things like security scans. And there is a lot of automated tools out there that will make this job pretty easy, essentially. We can do things like scanning dependencies. So in my example, I have a dependency analysis, but also things like scanning containers. So you're building container images. We can actually scan, there's tools that scan your containers as a whole, which kind of tell you, hey, this container has a slightly older version of the of some piece of software installed. So you can get all these flags. There is static application scanning, so things that will scan your like application flows on a code base level and give you a report out of that. Hey, this might be some insecure practices. You might be prone for a bunch of different things. You could do infrastructure as code scanning. So if you're deploying and you're provisioning your infrastructure as part of your CI/CD pipelines with, for example, Terraform or Pulumi, you can actually scan those configurations to make sure that you're not kind of leaving any permissions open, anything like misconfigured, basically. So there's tools that do all of these things. Stuff, and this is stuff that's been like manual for a very, very long time. And yeah, the last category is DAST, or dynamic application security testing, and that basically checks your application as it's running and tries using some kind of either machine learned approaches or some other techniques to kind of find vulnerabilities in a running application dynamically, essentially, which is pretty wild. We've actually done a webinar with a company called Neurolegion. They renamed themselves to BrightSec recently, and they're doing that basically, and it's really, really powerful. So yeah, let's look at one of those examples. So back to my pipeline, you might have seen the dependency vulnerability scan, and so that's a job that does scan my dependencies. This is a Node.js project, so I have my package.json and also package.lock, package lock.json, which contains all the versions of my applications or of my dependencies and their dependencies and everything in the chain, basically, that then gets installed in node underscore modules. But for our intents and purposes, we are interested in how this is actually done. So I'm using the tool called Snyk. Let me find it. Yeah, here we go. Which is available with an orb. So it has a Snyk. We have a Snyk orb in our marketplace for orbs. And you just need a single command. First, install any packages. And this works for like Node. It works for Python. I think it works for Maven as well, if you're in Java. And there might be other technologies that they work with. And that's all you need to do. And if it encounters any issues, for example, I was trying it on a Create React app actually the other day, and it would be failing just because one of the scripts was proven to be, like, one of the dependencies of the React scripts was proving to be unsafe. So yeah, this is all you need to do, and then in the pipeline, let's go to our workflow. We see our dependency vulnerability scan, and yeah, in the pipeline, it basically looks like this. Tells, hey, you have no vulnerabilities because I've updated everything, which is good, and that's it. So that's super cool. And with any of these tools, sometimes they will provide an XML output. Sometimes they will just link to where you need to go. If you have some kind of output, you can actually use artifacts to actually store these outputs and have them available within CircleCI. Snyk, for example, works slightly differently. They just kind of tell you, link you to the issues. Okay, so we have, this is our circleci.com/developer/orbs. So orbs marketplace. We have a category called security, where you can see a bunch of those. Sonar Cloud is another one that does very similar things, but for instance, in our Snyk orb, this one is actually made by them, so as a partners. And yeah, you see like all those kind of scan commands, and yeah, it just does everything, installs a CLI. All you need to do is provide it with the Snyk underscore token, which is the variable which we've seen, I think, in my Snyk context, which is passed to the job itself in a workflow. So that's essentially all we need to do. It obviously does more things than that. Whereas, yeah, here it is. No, sorry. I want to go back to the orb. The scan job actually does, if you pass in the Docker container image, it will actually scan the contents of that image, and that's pretty cool as well. And IAC, I think it actually scans things like Terraform stuff, for example, which is, again, all of these kind of static analysis is available for you. But yeah, there's other security related orbs, and you don't like, sometimes some providers don't really use orbs at the moment. They don't have orbs yet, but you can still just install their tools and invoke their services from a job. They usually have steps for Circle CI. And yeah, whatever your organization is using, there is like a lot of these tools for a lot of different use cases. And I'm pretty sure there is a way to integrate those tools in your CI/CD pipelines. Because yeah, whether you're running stuff on Windows, whether you're running stuff on Mac, Linux, Docker, VMs, or in fact your own infrastructure, you can usually do this. So yeah, that's our security scanning. And yeah, the most beautiful thing is this, because my pipeline is written in a way that, let's see my workflow, my build Docker job, right, which requires my dependency vulnerability scan. Even if all my tests have passed, but the dependency vulnerability scan has failed, this will still terminate the whole workflow. It will mark it as failing, which is what you really want, to be honest, because you don't want to be shipping things with insecure dependencies, as British Airways have learned a couple of years ago. If you've heard that one in the news, for example, they didn't use Circle CI, by the way. Anyway, so yeah, we covered a bunch of options for vulnerability scanning, automating that. Yeah, really depends on your use cases, what you need to do, what you're actually doing, what your organization already uses, and yeah, there's probably a vendor that you can integrate. Now let's move on to the last bit, which is probably the most. It encompasses the most things that we can cover. So it's the governance. So what you actually need to comply with, what you actually need to do in order to ship your software, whether it's just imposed by your organization or you're part of an industry that is regulated, like healthcare, finance, government. There's going to be different requirements for you. And obviously, there is a lot of different paths you could be taking. One easiest one is basically like, can I use the cloud solution, or do I need to run this on my own infrastructure? Or that's like just a binary question. Like some organizations can use a cloud, some organizations cannot. And so they can opt for the server solution. We also have this thing called Runner, which is like a hybrid way of running workloads. So running your jobs on your own infrastructure. So if you're thinking about how you have some requirements to run some jobs like deployment or building your software behind a firewall so that you can access some resources that you don't want the wider internet to have access to, you can actually do that with Runner because you install it on your infrastructure and you can run it. And I actually have I just had it open actually. Let me show you. This is my organization. I'm using an organization just because I can do members, and I'm show you things with members a little bit later. So we have, yeah, I've done a demo for Android, testing Android applications using Runner, but basically you install it on your local machine or wherever you need. It works with Kubernetes. It works with Docker itself or any kind of machines that you might have. So I have my Mac machine that I run my tests, and basically you're specifying a resource class, which is one of your registered runners for your organization. And that's really all you need to do. And then it runs on your machine. But obviously you need to provision all of that yourself. But yeah, it's called Runner, and it's pretty powerful, pretty popular for these kind of things. So one thing that's very common with a lot of organizations is requirements for manual approvals. So for example, if you have your CI/CD pipeline, you could have everything automated, but let's be realistic. You don't usually have everything automated, especially if you're just starting out, or especially if you actually have requirements to have someone decide, hey, this can go out or this cannot go out. Whether it's a manual QA process, whether it's a manual security review, someone, you can have things where you can or can't access things. So yeah, you can use workflows, approvals, sorry, for that. So for example, again, this is my workflow built as deploy. I have this job called approved by InfoSec. And you'll see that it has this type of approval, which means that it's not a standard Circle CI job, which just executes. It doesn't spin up any environments. It doesn't spin up any containers, virtual machines, but it just waits for someone to actually click the button and say, hey, this is that. Obviously, we've got a requires here. So once my build has completed, so that's how you build your graph, so that you have all this kind of chain of what's required. This will kind of enter into this job, and it will hold until this is approved, or after 2 weeks, I think it will terminate because of a timeout, but it holds for a long time without you having to do anything. And you can have multiple ones. For example, I can have one called approved by InfoSec and approved by team lead. And you can actually combine these with the communication. For example, if you've got the InfoSec team, which is asked you to send them a Slack message, you can actually combine that with the Slack orb to before it's actually in there. You can Slack them a message. Hey, this is pending for approval. Please have a review of this, or send them an email, send them a text message, whatever you're using. There's usually some kind of integration that you can do. So let's look at how this looks in the pipeline. So yeah, it's basically on hold. That's what you get. And I can hit approve. And this depends on your the type of user that you are, or like you can actually do things like user groups if you want to limit access to who can actually approve things. For example, this is my main user that created the organization, so I'm admin, so I can do anything. But I'll show you one that isn't an admin, that can't do everything. Again, like this is the approved by team lead. Again, they have different contexts. So InfoSec and team lead. And now it's actually doing our deployment. Let's do another little bogus commit, just so that we have something going on. I'll show you what happens if you don't have this. Another bogus commit. Let's push some changes. So it will trigger another pipeline. Boom. Yeah, this is now running. So in my organization, this is Marken-Demos, I have a couple of groups, or I have 3 groups. One is leads, for example, our production deployers. We have our InfoSec team, which is secret for some reason. And this kind of ties into your, for in this case, GitHub user groups, basically, and teams. So, and then obviously I've got dev deployers, which has my other user, not Zmarken, which is a member of the org, but doesn't have the permission to do something. But because we had our user groups specified. Let me go to contexts again. Because we had our user group specified, see that our dev deployers are specified in this kind of security groups, basically, and you can have any groups in here. So that way you can actually limit access control to your pipelines. This is super powerful, especially if you have an open source project, for example, organization-owned open source projects that you then have external contributors that you want to be part of organization, but you don't want them to be able to actually do some things like deployment. You can actually limit that very easily. And yeah, obviously I've got dev deployment, I've got prod deployment. Again, this is part of the leads group. And let's see if I can, I think I'll need to share another screen because I'm logged in with a different user. Let's do a stop share. Let's do this. Okay, this is a different user. You can see that I'm logged in. It's not Zmarken, on a different browser. And this one should be blocked, I think. Or maybe it's not. For some reason, this is allowed. Oh, yeah. This would fail because my user was not part of the right group. So again, this, you can go into that workflow now and you see that it's kind of set as unauthorized because the wrong person has actually approved it. So that's like, that's how you can control things so that this person can actually only use things on my, on the feature branches, but that they don't really, they can't really do any contributions on the main branch, for example. And let's go back to my main presentation screen. Where is this? I'm just trying to find this, my main presentation screen. Let me try and stop share and reshare this. Sorry, is it this? Oh, there. No, my screen doesn't work. Let me try again. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. Now this is sharing. Jess, could you confirm that I'm sharing the right screen?
Yeah, you are.
Thank you, thank you. I don't often have to switch between browsers and shares because of that. So yeah, that's some stuff you can do with this. And obviously, all the actions that we take, all the commits, all the approvals, all the changes of contexts are logged and they are accessible as an audit log. So if your organization requires to review audit logs from time to time, you can actually access this from us, and you'll get a whole list of things that's happened. So we've kind of used cover restricting pipeline access with the context. So context you've seen as are super powerful. You can do environment variables access, and also who can actually control different parts of the pipeline. Then last thing I want to mention is, so sometimes your deployment environment is critical to a degree that you don't want to give access to anyone outside of it. So you don't want to, you want to limit access to your deployment environment to only your CI/CD tool, and you can do that through IP ranges. This is another feature that we have. You toggle it, and basically for certain jobs, we can guarantee a list of IP or a list of IP ranges, basically, where those requests are going to be coming from. So you can actually have an allow list for only those ranges of IP addresses. So super powerful and useful for this. And yeah, I mentioned in the beginning that CSA organization that has our security questionnaires, where we kind of have all of our kind of organizational answers laid out, basically. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. Let's summarize everything. So we've looked at importance of security within the context of CI/CD. Hopefully I've given you a nice overview of what's possible, what's there to look out for. We've looked at various options for executing pipelines, from cloud to hybrid to actually on-prem. I did not demo on-prem for obvious reasons. Yeah, we're gonna store secrets in our pipelines in Circle CI, and then use them in the pipelines so that they're not available anywhere else. They're not part of the GitHub projects. We've implemented some automated dependency scanning, and talked through a bunch of other options. And we've talked about various approval options that you might have, like approving manually. You can chain approvals as well. And the idea is to essentially apply the principle of least privilege. So especially to your keys and secrets. So the least amount of information you can give a job or a step, the better, basically. So yeah, and now let's open it up for any questions that you might have. I would love to answer all of your questions. Okay, there is one. Ideally, we would want PRs from a branch in our repository to trigger pipelines automatically, but those from forks to require approval. Is that possible? I believe that's a very good question. I actually don't know whether this is possible in that way. So if you have a fork, you want to do require approval. Let me look at pipeline parameters. So there could be something in there. Using environment variables. Maybe it's in here. Built-in environment variables. Is that an open source project or a closed source project? Because that could make a difference, I think. If you have an open source project, and obviously you will have forks. If you have a closed source project, you don't have forks. It's an open source project, apparently. Yeah, so I would honestly add the core contributors to your organization, and then restrict it through a context, basically. And so that, yeah, obviously you can't continue a flow. But yeah, I might have to think about this one a bit more, to be honest. I'm not 100% how this could be done and what the right way for this would be. But I can see the importance of it. Yeah, if you are willing to follow up by email with me, I would be very grateful, and I will be able to answer this for you, or find out the answer, or find out who will have the answer. Zan@circleci.com is my details. So yeah. Yeah, there is another question. Blogs, articles, which could help implement from basics. Yeah, so we should have some things on our blog about securing pipelines. Let's go to it. So blog. So let's do the search here. Security. See, you've got a bunch of articles, like you've got guides that essentially point you to different blog posts, mostly on CircleCI. And yeah, I will share some articles, but I would just invite you to essentially just search through our blog. There's a ton of stuff that we do create and we do post, and it should be able to help you out, get started at least. All right, thanks for following up by email. Are there any plans to create an unofficial Terraform provider to configure things such as contexts and variables? I do not know of such plans. But again, I can find out and follow up. Yeah, I can find out. I'm not sure. So we've done most of it. Yeah, if with the Terraform provider question, if you don't mind just like following up by email, thanks, and I'll find it out for you. Cheers. But yeah, is there any more questions? We have a few more minutes. I don't think so. unless you're typing it. I'll give you 30 more seconds. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope you had a positive session, and yeah, the next of these practical tips and tricks webinars is going to be, I believe, on the 28th of April, and we will be talking about best practices for CI/CD for teams. So how teams can work best together and how you can apply various features of Circle CI to essentially make your team more productive, not only your core development team, but also your external teams and the rest of the organization. So yeah, if you're interested in that, just like stand by, and we'll publish the invites in the next weeks. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you have a nice rest of the day. Bye.